Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa from Gildas Club, Grand Rapids. It's good to be together again. Hope you're all doing well and you're staying safe. You're adjusting to whatever the fall is bringing to you, whether it's back to school or some people maybe back to work. And certainly we have a lot of changes in our weather and the trees. Our tree outside is already showing some red, which is really a little bit of a surprise. I'm not sure I'm ready to let go of summer, but here we are. So if you're new to Gildas Club and you've never seen a post or one of these Facebook Lives before, welcome. And if you're on a cancer or grief journey, we'd like you to know that Gildas Club is a free cancer support community, cancer and grief support community. And we come together in safe environments where we can either virtual or some in person, starting to get there, and talk about what it's like, what the emotional side of either of those journeys are. So if you're interested in getting connected with our community or learning more about what we do, you can give us a call at 453-8300. Or look on our website at gildasclubgr.org. And if you're here watching us, we would love to know that. So like this post, or if you found what we're talking about today to be helpful to you and you want to share it, please do that. We love to share the wealth at Gildas Club. So with that, we'll get started with our program today. And we're going to do two things today. We're going to sneak them in. We have Beth Nelson, who has been on staff at Gildas Club for a very long time. So we're going to sneak in that meet the staff. And so we're going to get to know Beth a little more. And then we're going to talk about what to say and not say to someone who is just diagnosed with cancer. And this is always a big topic of conversation at Gildas and in our groups. And so I love that we're going to have this conversation today. So welcome, Beth. It's great to have you.
Hi, Melissa. It's good to be here. It's always good to see you. We don't see each other so much in person anymore, but
I know.
This just has to do for a while longer, I guess.
I agree.
Oh, I just hear the rain pouring down. I like fall and I like this weather. It makes me feel very cozy and secure.
It is. I was just talking this morning about the first time you put on a long sleeve shirt or long pants and how cozy it feels. Yeah,
I like it. So.
It is. It's a beautiful time of year. That's for sure.
Well, as you mentioned, my name is Beth Nelson, and you said I've been with Gildas a long time, and that's true. Over 21 years. I was part of the staff that was there at the very beginning when we only had like 3 people when we opened up 20 years ago, and I've been there in some form ever since. The first I'd say 15 years, I was the program director. So I helped establish and create a lot of the programs that we use today. And then I kind of semi-retired, and in the last 5 years have been doing some odd things, some projects, doing a lot of support groups, especially during COVID when it's been a little bit easier to work from home.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that. And so I've been doing a lot of the support groups from home, filling in and so on.
Yeah.
Just personally, I am a cancer survivor. My husband is a cancer survivor, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little bit more. I also have 3 very grown children. They're all in their 40s, and I have 7 grandchildren. And that's, you know what they say, that's one of the biggest pleasures of your life after you retire and leave your work situation. So that's kind of where we're at. We find things to do, even though we don't go out too much. We keep trying to protect ourselves from these nasty germs out there. So, but we find lots of things to do. Gardening, we're puzzle masters. I have about 100. If anybody wants to borrow any, just let me know. So.
Wow. Oh, that's great. And you also do art, right? You do woodworking and art.
Yeah, I do some woodworking. And I've been doing, the last couple of years, I've been trying to learn how to paint. That's a wonderful thing about the internet. You can take lessons right online,
Yeah.
and you can pause it to go back and fix something. Use acrylic paint, you can always paint over it. That's my theory. You can always fix it up. But that's been fun, and it adds a lot of color around our house. So
That's very cool.
yeah.
Well, it's been my pleasure for the past 11 years and honor to work with you. I was really grateful to come into Gildas when you still were there, and what incredible foresight you've had and putting those programs together. And boy, they have the test of time, don't they?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah,
they sure do. And that's one of the beautiful things about Gilda's Club is our mission that was created for all the Gilda's clubs,
mhm,
and that we still adhere to that mission. And that's, to have a cancer community for men, women, and children, anyone living with cancer in any way, family and friends. And we still hold true to that mission. And then, we've added the grief support to that. And yet it has held the test of time for
yeah,
sure. Something we all need eventually in our lives.
yeah.
So
That's certainly. Well, I'm grateful for all your work and your legacy and your voice that comes through all of these years and continues.
thank
So,
you. Thank
yeah. All right. So, we're going to talk about what to say and not to say to someone who was diagnosed with cancer. And I think probably most of us have had a friend, family member, colleague, neighbor, someone in our life who has been diagnosed with cancer and has been at that moment of, okay, I'm going to interface with this person, or I want to, what is the right thing to say, or what is the wrong thing to say, or
Yeah, well, there's some of both. And it, when you had that situation in your life, you just taken a lot of different dynamics before you would think about talking to someone. Just a little bit about my own experience,
yeah,
because a lot of my thoughts about this topic are based on what my husband and I have experienced through our own cancer journeys. Excuse me. We all of us say things that we wish we hadn't, but sometimes if you have like a little basis to a plan before you talk to someone, I think that can be very helpful. My husband was diagnosed with kidney cancer about 16 years ago, and he had a kidney removed, and then we went on with our lives. And then just this year, the kidney cancer had metastasized, so it's now in his lungs. So we've had those experiences of having a cancer previously and then having it come back. And that even that adds a different dynamic when you're talking to someone.
yes,
And I was diagnosed with breast cancer about 18 years ago, and had treatment. And since then, things have gone well for me. I think what we want to think about is there really aren't any right things and wrong things. And you might say something that you wish you hadn't, but there are some things that are more helpful. And I would like to just talk about some of those. And especially, you mentioned things not to say. Just kind of want to start out with some things that maybe you want to put on the back burner, and some ways that when you're approaching someone that has just been diagnosed. I think one of the first things is to try to maintain a check of your emotion.
mhm,
Most of us are very upset when we hear a friend or a loved one has cancer. And we have that absolute right and to do that. But when you're talking to that person at first, it might be better if you can just kind of keep your own feelings for a later time, because we don't want to give them the burden of our feelings.
yeah,
And I will use my husband as an example. I got my cancer news on the phone, and he was in the background crying. I was still on the phone with the doctor. He was so upset, and it really was very difficult for me to manage what was happening with him and listening.
yeah,
That was the way he reacted, and we got through it. But I think if someone can try and keep that to themselves for a little while, we don't usually tell people to check their emotions, but this might be a good time to save them for later.
Yes.
So
Right.
it's just kind of burdening them with an extra thing to have to manage right at the time.
Right.
Secondly, and I'm going to use my husband again here, and he knows because we've talked all about this. I really suggest that you don't be too Pollyannish. That's what I'm saying. And by that, our tendency when we're talking to someone is to comfort them and to say things like, oh, it's going to be okay. You kind of hear that through your diagnosis with the medical community. They'll say, oh, it's probably nothing. It's probably nothing. And then when it comes out to be something, it's like, oh, yeah, it wasn't nothing.
Right.
And when you have people in your personal life doing that with you, oh, it's nothing, don't worry about it, it's nothing, don't worry about it. You want to tell them you don't know that.
Yeah.
And I don't feel that. And what we had to do with my husband and I is we had to have a conversation. And I had to ask him, I said, please don't keep telling me it's nothing because we don't know that yet. What I need from you is to hear you're going to do this with me. Whether it turns out to be a big thing or a small thing, I need to hear that I'm here for you and I'm going to do this with you.
You know, I'm gonna stop you really quick because I think you're talking about what now is, there's a lot of discussion out there, is that toxic positivity. And there's a difference between toxic positivity and being helpfully and positively supportive. So you don't necessarily want to say this is awful and get into the awfuls, but not to be like what you said, this Pollyannish. And I loved that you took that situation and turned it into this moment of deep communication, which is really important, and being able to express what you needed and him being able to hear you.
Yeah, it was important. And that happened to us many years ago. And we used that life lesson all through the rest of our marriage, you know, because that is something that can be used in very many different situations. And somebody's just, you feel like they're, you know, just not listening to you. Sometimes we just need to tell people what we need and what we want and, you know, you can use that on through life. And it's really a pretty easy conversation. And the person that you have that with is usually pretty grateful because it's hard to be up all the time and say, oh, this is fine. Sometimes that person needs to say, oh, yeah, we're going to do this together.
Yes.
And that can be used in lots of different ways. So
yeah,
that toxic positivity, those are things in our groups that's discussed all the time.
yes.
And we need to really keep that in mind when we're talking to someone, especially who's newly diagnosed and is so overwhelmed with emotion.
Yeah, that's great. And what about that comparing, like coming, like you tell someone and then they're like, oh my gosh, so and so had, you know.
Yeah,
there's
that can be very, very hard to hear. And I think, you know, you can go the same way with we want to reassure people. You know, we want to reassure us that your aunt had it 40 years ago and is still living. And but no two cancer stories are the same. And it's really what we don't want to do is burden somebody else with a story that's not relevant to them. And we also don't want to burden the newly diagnosed with a story that's a horror story. Oh, my aunt died of cancer 5 years ago. Oh, that was the hardest thing. This person doesn't need that. And we do that, you know, naturally we want to share and we want to either reassure people that we've been through this or someone else has and it's been okay. But the horror stories are really difficult to hear. So if you can kind of keep those stories to yourself, and our whole goal in this conversation is going to be to open up conversation with the person we're talking to. And we're going to talk a little bit about some ways to do that. but try and keep the stories about other people behind you right now, because no cancers are alike. No two, even people who have the same type of cancer, it's very different. The situations are different. The people are different. The emotions are different. And we don't want to try and make them the same.
Yes. Yeah, that's really good. And there's a difference between if you had a story of cancer yourself, an experience, and they're coming to you to talk with you about your experience, or then handing them someone else's experience, right? So someone may be coming to you and asking to hear about how you managed your own cancer story, right?
Totally. And that's, that's part of your conversation and part of your listening skills to find out if that's what they want you there for.
Yeah.
And lots of times it is somebody who's seeking a mentor or someone who's been down the path before. Yeah. And I think you'll know that right away,
Yeah.
because the first question might be, well, did you have this treatment? How did this go for you? And then that's a whole different conversation than somebody tells you and you tell them about somebody else, but telling them about your own experience.
Right.
And even
Yeah.
that, we need to be a little bit careful how we do it.
Yes. I like to say we try to keep those words you need to do and supposed to, and just talk about this was what happened with me and this is what worked or didn't work. But otherwise, it's their decision.
Right.
What
We're not there to
information
give them
take.
advice or opinion.
Right.
We're there to tell them what worked for us.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah. I think another tendency people might have is to try and figure out why this person got cancer.
Yeah.
And I think we all do that in an effort to reassure ourselves, even subconsciously reassure ourselves, oh, that can't happen to me. And lots of times people will say, just blurt out questions like, well, did you smoke? Trying to figure out why this happened to that person. And those type of questions are not helpful at this point. And I know it's a temptation to do that. I think that once again, because all cancers are different and because huge percentage, most cancers, it's never figured out why it happened. It's a combination of lots of different dynamics that come together in a perfect storm. It's generally not one reason. And you're not going to figure that out or get that information from that person. And it could be really difficult for them to try and reassure you with their information about their cancer journey. So I think it's kind of, it's good to kind of put that in the back of your mind that you don't need to know how they got it or why they got it. Let's just let them give you that information in their own time if they choose.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah. And that's, I just want to caveat to sort of stay off the internet on undocumented sites because they delve into that. And so even if as a support person, you get that information, if it's not asked for, keep it to yourself.
Right. Yes. I did an internet search to do read some different documents on why people get cancer. There were no answers to that question. There were like, a lot of it boiled down to it's just the straw you drew,
Right.
and that's hard to hear because we would like to know why, because then we could cure this disease, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, keeping that kind of stuff to yourself really is one way to help that person.
Yes, I agree.
So kind of more specifically, I have just a few phrases that I think you might want to take off your plate when you're talking to someone, especially at the beginning of a diagnosis. And one of those is, I know how you feel. We don't know how that person feels. And we want to be careful about that. Even if you're talking to me and you have the same diagnosis I had, I still don't know how you feel. So I'm not going to tell you that. I think that that can be very hard because all of these statements stop the conversation. And what we want is to open up a conversation. So if I tell you I know how you feel, you don't need to tell me or talk to me about it anymore. So I would leave that one off the plate if I could. Another
So
one,
let me just, what would you say instead in that,
Um,
just that statement?
instead of I know how you feel, I would
Yeah.
say, well, I have some things coming up.
Oh,
Maybe
okay.
something like I'm so sorry that you're dealing with this,
Yeah.
or that one very statement, this must be very hard for you. Just giving, and then after anything like that you say like that, to just be quiet
Yeah.
and let them tell you how you feel. Let them tell you how hard it is, because that's where you're going to be able to offer the most support, is by listening to that story.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Finish the rest of the other. I got
Okay,
ahead of
that's okay.
myself there. Sorry.
You can say all of this twice. It's not too much. So
Yes, that's true.
I also think that we talked about this a little bit before, is that we don't want to give our opinions. We don't want to say, here's who you should call. This is what you should do. You need to get this test. You need to get this treatment. We need to be careful not to offer opinions and advice, because once again, the story is different for everyone. The diagnosis is different. Everything's different. So trying not to give too much information or too many opinions is really an important piece of talking to someone.
Yeah.
We also talked a little bit about you'll be fine. My husband's catchphrase that we had to talk over. That person probably and likely will be fine, but they need to figure that out for themselves. You telling them is not reassuring. So kind of leaving that statement off. Another one that can be very hard for people, and we all say it, well, it kind of goes along with the statement, you're so strong, you look so good. When inside, people don't feel strong and they don't feel good. So to tell someone they're strong when they don't feel that way makes them feel like they're failing, that they're not doing this right. And it's hard to come up with statements that might counteract those, but just any of the statements we're going to talk about that you would be able to offer as consolation and conversation openers would be, really effective. And a lot of this is just part of active listening. And we really need to take our cues from the person we're talking to.
Yeah.
This is very much a two-sided conversation, because that person might tell you, oh, I just don't think I can do this. Let them tell you more about that rather than saying, but you're the strongest person I know, because they're not feeling that way. Let's just let them open up the conversation and tell you why they're feeling so weak. And most often, putting a conversation on the table is one of the most therapeutic and loving things you can do for someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So let's see. I was thinking about ask that piece of that statement of asking how long do you have, and how difficult that is to hear as someone who's right.
Yeah, that can be very difficult. I don't know that, there's lots of ways to say that. They might say, well, there are lots of ways to find out that with more appropriate questions, but to just say, well, how long do you have to live? Nobody knows the answer to that question. You can ask your physician that question over and over and you get different answers. not specific ones, because no one knows. And if someone wants to tell you, well, they've given me a prognosis of so long, but they don't know for sure, that's okay. But that needs to be information that's coming willingly and from the person who's been diagnosed, because that can be very hard to hear that from someone that you care about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
I'm going to add one to this, is that I know that some people have talked quite a bit in some of my groups about when they hear, "You're such an inspiration to me."
Mhm.
And it goes along with that strong, "You're so strong," and how they sometimes resent it, because they're like, "I didn't choose this. I didn't choose to
Yeah,
be an inspiration. I'm just doing what I need to do to survive, to get through this." And
right. And
yeah,
that kind of goes along with the conversations that happen a lot about people, who wants to be called a survivor and who does.
yeah,
We define at Gildas, we define survivorship the minute you're diagnosed, but a lot of people don't feel that way.
yeah,
And so you're a survivor, you're an inspiration, you're so strong. Those can be hard to hear. And again, we say those out of the goodness of our heart, you know, and yet just to think about that a little bit and take those cues from the person you're talking to can go a long way in you're trying to comfort someone with a diagnosis.
yes, absolutely. So what do you say? I know we've talked a little bit about that, and yeah, what is something that is, I want to say, life supporting?
Yeah,
That,
yeah. And
yeah,
I think, when you go in that conversation, you might want to have some specific statements in mind.
yeah,
Um, I know when I first started working at Gildas, that's what I wanted. I wanted those statements that I knew were going to be supportive and also allowed the conversation to open up. So a few of those, one might just be, we want, because we want to, a lot of us will say, I'm so sorry to hear this. And and I think that's an okay statement, but you can even put out on that, I'm so sorry you're dealing with this.
yeah,
Because that takes away from, I'm sorry to hear this. That makes me sorry and sad, to I'm sorry you're dealing with this, because it puts it back into being a conversation about them. And so that's a statement that you can leave. I'm sorry you're dealing with this, and see where they go with that.
yeah. You could
Another,
even say something like, "I wish you weren't dealing with this,"
yeah, something
right? Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Mhm.
If "I'm sorry"
Yeah,
doesn't work for you,
sometimes the
yeah,
I'm sorry works and doesn't work, but sometimes it's first thing out of our mouth.
right. It's
Because we
very
are very,
culturally we've been taught that. Yeah,
yes, we have, and
yeah,
sometimes it's not helpful. But and to say it in another way is really the most helpful.
yeah.
Another way to say that might be, oh, this must be so hard to deal
Mm,
with. And that also gives them a chance to tell you what's going on. This must
yeah,
be very difficult for you. Um, I have a statement that I've tried to refine it because it's not very couth, but I just want to say this really sucks, and maybe a better way to say it, this feels so unfair. This feels so
mhm.
unfair to me,
Yeah, yeah,
because that's how I feel when I hear that someone's diagnosed. It feels unfair
yeah,
to them, to me, to everyone. And to say that can make that, it doesn't make them think, oh yeah, this is unfair. People already feel that way when they get a diagnosis. Nobody wants this, and they already feel like, I don't want this to happen to me. This just isn't fair.
yeah,
So that can be a statement, something like, this is really tough. This must be really tough for you. And then the biggest thing is to let this conversation open up. What we want to really do in a conversation is make it a conversation back and forth where you can, bounce off what the person is telling you, and to give them a chance. Everyone wants to tell their story. And, that's what we do in our groups at Gildas Club. We let people tell their stories over and over. And at the beginning of a diagnosis, there are really two things people like to do. They like to get information, and that's why, we go to the doctors and we research, and we want to tell our story. We want someone to be in this boat with us and to listen to our stories. So these are statements that can help, with that, as as far as being able to comfort, listen, go ahead and figure out what it is you can do to help someone.
Yes, yeah. Well, and I do want to say that there's yeah, and you have a little bit of this down there, but there's such great websites for help with meals, and if that person is open to that, those are great ways to help without having to
Yeah.
have them be in charge of it.
Right. And the way to do that, one good way to do that is, before you start, that you might want to say, is it okay if I ask you some questions? Do you mind if I ask you? And then, then you can go into the questions about how you can, help them. What are some specific things that you can do? Some questions you might ask. So if you might want to ask them, so what are they telling you?
Mhm.
When you're talking about the medical, what are they telling you? What happens next? And another really good question is when, and this might be further down the line when you're working with this person or talking to them, how are you feeling today? You want to get that word today in there. It's very important because in general, they're probably not doing that great, but how are they doing today can really bring to you the specific needs they might be looking for, helping you to figure out some ways that you can help them by getting, how are you doing today, can be really helpful for you to be able to figure out what practical support can you give that person.
Yeah.
And
That's great.
I will say one of the best things you can do is give specific practical support suggestions. Things like, oh, I see you're just getting in the car. Can I drive you? Can I drive you where you're going to this? Can I take you to the store? I'm going to bring you soup Friday, and I make this great soup, and I'm going to bring it to you. It might even be Italian, but the more specific you are, the more likely they're going to take you. We like to say, and we like to write, and we like to tell everyone, call me if you need something.
Yes.
Most people don't do that. It's very hard to reach out. If that's anything I've learned on these cancer journeys, it's very hard to call someone for help. It's even hard to walk next door and ask the neighbor, because you just don't want to trouble people if you don't need to. And we are so used to being so independent. So if you give people specific suggestions, or just do it, I'll be there to walk your dogs every Saturday morning at 10. And, things like that. People don't generally refuse those offers, or if they do refuse them, then you back off and you try it again another time.
Yes. Yeah, that's great. And that's that same, like, can I set up a meal train for you? Or can I
set up a care page?
Yeah, set up a care page.
And the care pages are, so many people get so tired of talking, especially at the beginning when you're getting all the phone calls. And phone calls are intrusive sometimes, even though people mean well. But if you have a care page and then people can react on the care page, to set that up for someone is a huge help.
Well, I think this brings me to the thought of, don't take it personally if someone can't get back to you or doesn't get back to you right away, and say, oh, I sent them a text and I never heard from them. Well, they're managing what's happening in the moment, all the phone calls and the appointments from the doctor, and probably their household. And so sometimes just leaving a voicemail saying, I'm thinking of you, or sending a text, I'm thinking of you, I love you, is enough, and not expecting that return call. Yeah.
I wanted to just share, I just had a friend who was very sick, and she ended up like my best friend, and she ended up in Ann Arbor for a liver transplant.
Oh my
And
goodness.
she was too sick to respond. She was too sick to be thinking about me in any way. But
Yeah.
the whole time that she was in Ann Arbor, she had her phone there, and lots of times she can read it. I texted her like every other day, and I put down little crazy things we did over the last 30 years.
Uh,
There were some things I didn't dare write, but I wrote her, remember when we did this, remember when we did that. And then when she got better, thank God, and got the liver, she read all of those. And I had just kept contact with her, but I didn't expect anything back from her because I knew I wasn't going to get it.
yeah.
Just like what you just said, sometimes people are just too sick and too tired and they don't respond. But with a non-invasive thing like a text, you can still keep sending them. Just drop in a day to say, okay, without, expecting that person to answer the phone and give you, a talk back. So
Yeah.
I like the texting. I think that can be very helpful. It's almost like when we used to send cards.
Yeah.
And I still think cards are like probably one of the best things that you can do because they know you went to the store, you bought a card, you addressed it, you wrote on it, and sending a card. And you'll walk into people's homes and they have cards that they've read over and over. So it's still a good idea to have some stamps, and
Yes.
something personal like that.
Yeah. I want to say a couple things is a number of the people in my group talk about one woman made a whole wall of the cards that she received, and it was a hallway in her house that she traveled quite often. So she could look at the cards every single day and see all of that love and support that she had and feel it. And another woman put them on a string um, in the room that she spends most of the time with, so like a clothesline, so she could look at them. And they are very, very important.
They're warm and they're colorful and they just surround you,
Yeah.
with all that love that people are sending you. And some of the best cards I remember getting were really from people I didn't know all that well, but maybe had been on the same cancer journey and said,
Yeah.
here I am, I'm sending you this card. And it was just, yeah, the cards should not be a thing of the past. I don't think.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so I love that. Keeping in touch um, and yeah, not
And
taking it
another way of
personally. Hello and welcome back. You probably noticed that I'm a little bit different than when we were having the conversation earlier. And that is because during the conversation, there was a very big thunderstorm happening, and all of my power went out. And Gilda Radner taught us very well at Gilda's Club that it's always something. And so we have really put in place that philosophy and learned to roll with what is happening in the moment. So here I am to say goodbye and to wrap up this program. So thank you for your patience. And we're so grateful to Beth for being on staff and being such a wonderful resource for us, for sharing her heart and her story and her knowledge with us. We hope that you found that conversation about what to say to someone when they have a diagnosis of cancer rich and helpful. And if you think that someone might benefit from hearing it, you're welcome to share it or make a comment on this post about what you liked most, maybe what you've done in the past, or things that you have heard from others that have helped, or things that you've said to others that are helpful that maybe we missed. I know there's a lot more to discuss about this topic. And if you're new to a cancer or grief journey and you'd like to get connected with our free support program, we would love to talk with you. Give us a call at 616-453-8300 or look on our website, gildasclubgr.org. send us a message and we'll reach back out to you. And if you're a member and you've started to hear probably some murmurings, they are true. We are dipping our toe back into the in-person program this month. So just starting this week, actually today, our grief groups will be in person and have a virtual option. We call that hybrid. So if you're still comfortable with coming in virtually on Zoom, you can do that. And we'll have the Zoom group right in the group of in person at the clubhouse. If you choose to come to the clubhouse, please bring a mask with you and know that all of the COVID protocols are still in place. We'll do a screening. And if you've felt sick or been exposed, please don't come to the clubhouse. Just hop on virtually. Or if you have questions about it, give us a call. All the information is on our website on the calendar portion. So we're looking forward to seeing some of you, and we would love to hear from you, and we'll see you next week. Be well, everyone. Take care.